Hello, AP and Honors. This video is to help you go through Chaucer's descriptions in the prologue to the Canterbury Tales as we talk about and take notes on each of the 30 pilgrims that will be going to Canterbury. Now, Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales has as his plan to have each pilgrim, after the descriptions of the pilgrims in the prologue, to tell 2 stories going to Canterbury and then 2 stories on the way back. So that would have been a collection of 120 stories. Unfortunately for us, Chaucer died when he had only finished 22 stories plus 2 more in fragments. Now the book, the Canterbury Tales, is still a pretty good sized book just with those 24 tales in it. But you can imagine if he had finished 120 stories, how big the volume really would have been. So he didn't get to all of them, but he got to a few of them. But our textbook centers mostly around the class differences of all of these 30 people that he talks about. So I want you to turn your workbook textbooks to the Canterbury Tales, page 129. This may take us a couple of different videos, 2 or 3 videos even, to share these with you. On these videos with the program that we use, we can only record 15 minutes at a time. So this might end up being part 1 of a multi-part video, but we'll see how we do. So on page 129, what I'd like you to do, whenever I go over some of the descriptions of the Canterbury Pilgrims, jot notes in the side or maybe highlight in the text. Now, that's no substitute for you're going back and really reading the prologue before we finally have a test on unit number 2. But it will give you a good outline of things to look out for and to remember about each pilgrim. Okay? So if we noticed on page 129, we start out with a Middle English practice. Now, I went over Old English with you already. This is Middle English. Listen to the sounds of the beginning of the Canterbury Tales. Wonder April with his shower sota, the drucht of March had perse to the rota, on by the every vein and swish liqueur, of which vertu engendered is the fluor. One zephyr sake, with his sweete breath, inspired hath in every halt and haith, the tindere crappus and the youngest honor, hath in the ram his havocours irona, and small foulest macken melodia, that schleppen all the nicht with open ear. So pricketh them nature in hier courages, then alongen folk to gun on pilgrimages, and palmerus for to sakens, drown to strondus, to fernahalvis, couth and sondrilandus. On spatially from Avery Sharacinda, of England to Canterbury they winda, the holy blissful Marta Fortiseca, that him that hopen, one that they waseka. Now, to hear the vowel sounds, they sound quite different from our vowel sounds today. But if you look on page 129 at the text, it should look a lot more familiar to you than our Old English did when we practiced Caedmon's hymn. So we have actually what Chaucer said in modern English right under that. It is in April, better weather to go on a pilgrimage or religious journey, and these people are going from London to Canterbury, England. It's safer to go in a group because bandits are on the road. Now, in real life, probably people from all these different social classes would not have gone together anywhere. But Chaucer is going to throw them all together. And if you look at your introduction to Chaucer in the textbook, we know that he knew people from many, many different walks of life because of the various jobs that he had. And so he's just going to put them all in there. As we take notes in our book, as we look at the descriptions in our book, highlight, underline, write notes over in the margin, just to help you as you later go back and read the Canterbury Pilgrims. But I do want to go over descriptions of all 30 pilgrims with you. Okay, so we start out on page 130, toward the bottom of the page, the knight. The knight is a gentleman knight. He's not a rough knight, the way a lot of knights were back in those days. He fights for noble causes. He's a very famous knight. He has many fine horses, so he is a wealthy knight. But he's very modest as a man. He does not dress up very much. As a matter of fact, his tunic has rust stains, or his chainmail had rusted. Many people didn't take baths in the Middle Ages. They were afraid of the water, afraid it was contaminated. And so that's when perfume became popular. So our knight, although a good man and a wealthy man, is kind of dirty. Number 2, on page 131, his son, the squire. Now, his son dresses up. He's trying to impress his girlfriend. So that's one reason why he entered the military in the first place. But it seems that this young man is about 20 years old, curly hair, but a very strong young man, though of moderate height. He is literate. He can compose music. He can write. He can joust and dance. So he knows the social graces, but he also knows the military skills that he needs. He had already been in a few battles and had done well. Third, the knight's servant, the yeoman. A yeoman is a forester. This man had trained when he was younger to know woodcraft. This man is dressed in all kinds of weaponry. He has peacock feathered arrows and a strong bow. He has a shield and a sword and a dagger. So quite probably he's there like a bodyguard. Now I'm sure the knight knows how to fight well anyway, but it's proper to his station to have at least one servant along the trip, and that is the yeoman. Number 4 is a nun. The nun is described as a prioress. A prioress was second in charge of an abbey. This lady is a big lady. This lady speaks French, but it's country French, not real fine French. She wants people to think she's a little bit better than she really is. Chaucer says that she was obsessed with table manners, something that medieval nuns really didn't care much about. She was pleasant and friendly, but counterfeiting a courtly kind of grace, to seem dignified in all her dealings. So she is putting on, so people will think that she's higher than she really is. She has pet dogs with her. Our picture on 133 shows a dog with the nun there. Nuns and monks really weren't supposed to have pets in the Middle Ages. Any money left over was supposed to go to feed the poor, but she has her dogs, and she will not let anybody get onto her dogs. If they strike one of her dogs, she has a fit. She has a coral trinket, Chaucer says, as well as a golden brooch. So religious jewelry was okay for nuns to have, but her golden brooch has a Latin inscription, Amor Vince Omnia, love conquers all. Now, character 5, right under the nun, is a second nun, and all the description we have is the chaplain at her cell, which means a younger nun who would have served the older lady nun. Right after that, Chaucer says, and 3 priests as well. But later on, Chaucer goes back and he says the nun's priest's tale, as if there's only one nun's priest. So either he's including other religious people like the monk and the friar in that number, or he meant to go back and edit and only have one priest traveling with the nun. So we're going to do that for Mr. Chaucer. We're going to edit that and say one priest traveling with the 2 nuns. And that one priest then is number 6. Number 7 is the monk. This monk is not a typical monk. He's a wealthy monk. He likes hunting. He doesn't spend his time around the monastery. He doesn't think the old strict rules of monastery life should apply to him. We also learned that his fur-lined robe, or his robe is fur-lined, which is very unusual. Greyhounds are his hunting dogs. And he has a pin at his neck, and Chaucer makes a snide comment that it looked like a lover's knot. Sometimes men wore chains, and their girlfriend would tie a knot in the chain to say that they're taken. And Chaucer makes a little comment, that's what it looked like to him. So this monk may have a girlfriend on the side, and he's not supposed to have a girlfriend on the side. On page 135, we have a second kind of monk. Number 8 is a friar. A friar usually mingles with the people a lot more. Remember, we have Friar Tuck in the Robin Hood legend. Friar Lawrence is the priest that Romeo and Juliet went to get married. This is Friar Hubert. And Friar Hubert likes the country people too. He likes the young girls especially, Chaucer tells us. But he also loves to hear confessions from people. Now, the tradition of confession is that once you confess your sins, you're given some holy task to do, prayers or good deeds to do. But this man takes money. So he figures if people pay him enough, they must be really sorry for their sins. So this theme of greed is real big in the Canterbury Tales. Number 9, on page 136, the merchant. The merchant has a forked beard and colorful clothing. He knows all about currency exchange and taxes, But Chaucer again puts in his snide comments, sometimes he does, and says, but the man himself was in debt. On page 137, number 10 is the Oxford Cleric. The Oxford Cleric is a young man in Oxford University studying to be a priest. But the young man does not want to be a priest, so he just stays in school. Sometimes those are called professional students. They just keep taking classes, but they don't ever graduate. He's skinny. His horse is also skinny because he doesn't spend much money except in buying books. He loves learning. His friends like him a lot because he's a very respectable young man and a very respectful young man. And they give him money, little scholarships to help him with his learning. And he prays for them when they do so. Number 11 is the sergeant at the law. The sergeant at the law was a member of a very high class of judges and lawyers in Chaucer's day. Only about 24 people in Chaucer's time held that position. So we would consider it a very high class judge and a high class lawyer. This person, it seems, was extremely intelligent. He knew 300 years of legal cases. Chaucer says ever since King William's time. So if that's William the Conqueror, that's been 300 years since Chaucer wrote. No one can find any mistake on any legal document this guy drew up. Number 12 is a franklin. A franklin is a major landowner, a descendant of one of those knights of William the Conqueror in 1066 when the French invaded. So this is one of the lords of the land. And as such, Chaucer says, he often had been a member for the shire. We would say he was a member of Parliament. He also is a part-time judge. He is also a sheriff, which at that time was a tax collector for people who lived on his land. And the man's obsession is food. He loves good food and drink. And he's a very friendly landowner. He has his household open all the time to anybody who wants to stop in and have a meal with him. But Chaucer says, woe to the cook, though, that worked for him, who was not ready for anything that he wanted. Our next group of people will be 13 through 17. And 13 through 17 have one description for all 5 of those. Haberdasher, that's a clothes maker. Nowadays it means a hat maker. Dyer, dyes cloth. Carpenter, he's either a house builder, furniture maker, deals with wood or stone. Weaver, weaves the cloth together. And carpet maker, could make rugs, but I've also read that a carpet maker made the cloaks that monks wore. Because when a monk takes off his cloak, he puts that on his bed, and that becomes his sheet that he sleeps under. So these guys were all in one impressive guild or professional society. They had grown rich. So although back in the Middle Ages there were the aristocrats and everybody else, truly there was a growing middle class or merchant class that had erupted. And these men who were aldermen in their town were a member of that middle range class. And Chaucer says if they didn't think they ought to be aldermen, their wives told them that they ought to be aldermen because they loved the social position that their husbands had reached. And these 5 men have number 18, a cook, traveling with them. Chaucer goes into a little bit of detail about all the good dishes the man makes, and then he has a snide comment, what a pity that he has a big runny sore on his leg. Now, you don't mention a physical imperfection in stories back in those days unless they are a symbol of a moral imperfection. So that may be Chaucer's way of saying he might have been a good cook, but he may not have been a very nice man. Number 20 is a doctor. The doctor told what was wrong with people back then by looking at their astrological charts. So Chaucer really doesn't make fun of him by saying that. He does say the man knew a lot about ancient medicine and about ancient medical authorities. But the man is greedy. He sells his drugs, especially in plague cities, where people would spend everything they had to try to get better. So he's not very religious, Chaucer says, so he's probably not going to Canterbury Cathedral to worship, but to sell his drugs to poor people. He wore red, and he loved gold. So for our first video, we've gone through character 1 through 20, and for our next video, we'll start with number 21, the woman from Bath City.